Welcome, dreamers, to another journey into the shadows. Tonight, we delve into the haunting tale of Corpsewood Manor, a place shrouded in mystery, tragedy, and whispers of the occult. Nestled deep in the forest of Georgia, this forgotten ruin has a reputation that sends shivers down the spine. For 5 friends, it was supposed to be a night of harmless fun. But what they encountered in the ruins will stay with them forever. Shadows that move, laughter that chills the soul, and a mystery that seems to follow them even as they leave. So, before we descend into the unknown, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the little ghost icon, the bell, to be notified of every new nightmare I bring your way. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's next. Now settle in, turn down the lights, and prepare for the shadows of Corpsewood Manor, because not all nightmares wait for you to sleep. Corpsewood Manor. The trip to Corpsewood Manor wasn't supposed to be anything serious, just a night of jokes, scares, and maybe a few beers. It was Anthony's idea, a last-minute plan fueled by boredom and Blake's constant need to stir the pot. Anthony, the level-headed wrestler, figured it'd be harmless fun. Blake, ever the jokester, saw it as another opportunity to push the envelope. It was late by the time they piled into Blake's car. The seats were sticky with the heat of the day, and the faint smell of fast food lingered in the air. Anthony sat in the passenger seat, his arms crossed as he listened to Blake ramble on about some prank he'd pulled last week. The others, Megan, Sarah, and Evan, squeezed into the back, laughing and passing around a half-empty bag of chips. At a red light just outside their hometown, Blake lit a cigarette, his grin wide as he flicked ash out the window. "You think I could hit that car with this?" he asked, nodding toward the vehicle idling beside them. "Don't be an idiot," Anthony said, but Blake was already leaning out the window, the cigarette balanced between his fingers. "Watch this," Blake said, and with a quick flick, the cigarette sailed through the air, bouncing harmlessly off the car's windshield. The driver didn't react, didn't even look their way. Still, the group erupted into laughter, the kind that came from the thrill of doing something stupid and getting away with it. "Nice shot," Megan said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Blake shrugged, clearly pleased with himself. "Bet you couldn't do it." Anthony rolled his eyes, leaning back in his seat. "You're going to get us killed one day." Blake just laughed, gunning the engine as the light turned green. 40 minutes later, they found themselves at another red light in a town they didn't recognize. The night had grown darker, the streets quieter, and the excitement of the trip was starting to wear off. Blake drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, humming along to a song none of them were really listening to. Then the car from earlier pulled up beside them. The laughter died instantly, replaced by a heavy silence as everyone stared out their windows. It was the same car. There was no mistaking it. The chipped paint on the hood, the mismatched headlights, the faint outline of a bumper sticker too faded to read. The driver sat motionless, their face obscured by the shadows of the cab. "Creepy," Sarah muttered, breaking the tension. Blake forced a laugh, rolling down his window. "What, you following us?" The driver didn't respond. The light turned green and the car rolled forward without so much as a glance in their direction. "Well, that was weird," Anthony said, his voice low. Blake shrugged, but his hands gripped the wheel tighter as they continued down the road. They stopped at a gas station just outside of the small town near Corpsewood Manor. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly as they stepped out of the car, stretching their legs and grabbing snacks from the convenience store. Anthony stood by the pump, watching the others as they joked and argued over who was paying for what. Inside, Blake leaned against the counter, grinning at the cashier. "So, you ever been up to that haunted place, Corpsewood Manor?" The cashier, a wiry man in his 40s, didn't look up from his magazine. "Why you want to go there?" "Why not?" Blake said, tossing a pack of gum onto the counter. "Heard it's a good place to scare the girls." The cashier snorted, finally meeting Blake's gaze. "You don't want to mess around up there. Folks don't come back the same." Blake laughed, but it sounded forced. You mean they don't come back at all? The cashier didn't answer, just rang up the gum and handed Blake his change. You kids be careful, he said, his tone flat but heavy with something unspoken. Blake shrugged it off, rejoining the group outside. But as they piled back into the car and started the final stretch of the drive, the cashier's words hung in the air like a warning they didn't fully understand. The turnoff was easy to miss. A narrow gravel path, overgrown with weeds and framed by leaning trees, it looked less like a road and more like an afterthought. Blake slammed on the brakes just in time, the car jerking to a stop in a cloud of dust. "This is it?" Sarah asked from the back seat, leaning forward to peer out the window. Her voice carried a note of doubt, edged with unease. "Looks like it," Blake replied, grinning as he steered the car onto the path. The tires crunched over the loose gravel, the headlights casting long, jagged shadows ahead. "What's wrong, Sarah? Getting scared already?" Sarah didn't answer, sinking back into her seat as the car bumped and jolted over the uneven terrain. The road was worse than they'd imagined. Long and twisting, it snaked up the side of the hill like a coiled serpent, each turn revealing another stretch of gravel scarred with massive potholes. The holes were deep and jagged, their edges crumbling like old wounds. "Do you think these are natural?" Evan asked, his voice quiet. "Or did someone, put them here?" "To keep people out," Sarah murmured, staring out her window. "Or to keep them in." "Don't start," Megan snapped, though her eyes never left the road. "It's just an old logging trail. Of course it's messed up." "Yeah," Blake chimed in, his tone too casual. "Nothing spooky about crappy road maintenance." Anthony didn't say anything, but he leaned forward slightly, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. The car bounced violently as the tires dipped into another hole, and Blake cursed, gripping the wheel tighter. "Maybe take it slow," Anthony said, his voice calm but firm. Blake laughed nervously. "What, you think we're going to get stuck? We're fine. It's just a few potholes." But as they climbed higher, the road grew worse. The potholes became larger, deeper, forcing Blake to swerve to avoid them. The trees pressed in closer, their branches scraping against the sides of the car like skeletal fingers. The air seemed heavier here, colder, and the gravel crunched louder beneath the tires, the sound echoing unnaturally in the silence. "You're sure this is the right way?" Megan asked, breaking the tension. "Pretty sure," Blake replied, though his grin faltered slightly. He glanced at the GPS on his phone, but the screen showed nothing but a blank map, the signal lost miles ago. "Great," Megan muttered, crossing her arms. "Just great." The ruins of Corpsewood Manor loomed ahead, a crumbling skeleton of brick walls and charred wood barely visible in the faint moonlight. The air was heavy, thick with the metallic scent of decay. Each step toward the ruins felt deliberate, as if the ground itself resisted their approach. Blake led the group, his flashlight casting long, flickering shadows that seemed to dance on the fragmented walls. Megan followed close behind, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "This place looks like it's about to collapse," she muttered, kicking at a loose brick. "Are we sure it's safe to even be here?" "Safe enough," Blake said, his tone light despite the tension in his shoulders. He turned to the group, his grin barely visible in the dim light. "Come on, it's just an old house. What's the worst that could happen?" Anthony glanced around, his jaw tight. The skeletal remains of the manor seemed to shift in the shadows, as though alive and watching. "Let's just stick together," he said. "No wandering off." Sarah nodded quickly, her pale face illuminated briefly by the beam of her flashlight as she moved closer to Evan. He didn't seem fazed, but his usual laid-back demeanor had vanished, replaced by a quiet intensity. "This place has a vibe," he muttered, almost to himself. Blake rolled his eyes. "Don't go all ghost hunter on me now." As they moved further into the ruins, the ground beneath their feet grew uneven. The walls bore layers of graffiti, jagged symbols, and crude drawings etched into the crumbling brick. Some symbols were familiar, pentagrams, inverted crosses, but others were abstract, their twisting lines forming shapes that seemed to writhe when caught in the flickering light. Megan stopped, her flashlight fixed on a particularly intricate symbol carved into the wall. "What do you think this means?" Blake leaned in, squinting at the symbol. "Probably just some wannabe Satanist trying to be edgy." "It looks old," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "Older than the rest." Anthony frowned, his eyes scanning the ruins. "Let's not touch anything." The air grew colder as they ventured deeper into the manor, the faint sounds of the forest outside fading into an oppressive silence. Their flashlights flickered, the light dimming momentarily before returning to full strength. "Did you see that?" Megan asked suddenly, her voice sharp. "See what?" Blake turned, his flashlight swinging in an arc. "I thought I saw—" She trailed off, her eyes darting toward a dark corner of the ruins. "Never mind." Blake chuckled nervously. "You're spooking yourself." "No," Evan said quietly. "I saw something too." The group fell silent, their flashlights trained on the corner Megan had indicated. The shadows there seemed thicker, almost tangible, as though something moved just beyond the edge of the light. "We should go," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "I don't like this." Blake hesitated, his bravado faltering. "Let's just check out the main room," he said. "We came all this way." Anthony clenched his jaw but nodded. "Fine. One room, then we're out." The group pressed on, their footsteps echoing faintly against the broken walls. They entered what must have been the main living area, a wide space dominated by a broken fireplace. The floor was littered with debris, splintered wood, shattered glass, and unidentifiable scraps of metal. Blake stepped forward, his flashlight beam catching on something metallic protruding from the fireplace. "What's this?" he muttered, crouching to get a better look. "Don't touch it," Anthony warned. But Blake ignored him, brushing away the debris to reveal a rusted chain bolted into the brickwork. As he pulled at, the chain Blake had tugged at creaked ominously before snapping back into place, releasing a low groan that reverberated through the ruins. The sound echoed unnaturally, as though the house itself was alive and reacting to their presence. Megan grabbed Blake's arm. "What did you do?" she hissed, her eyes darting toward the shifting shadows around them. "I didn't do anything," Blake replied, his voice shaking. "It's just a—" A loud crash interrupted him, coming from somewhere deeper within the ruins. The sound was like glass shattering, followed by a faint, distorted whisper that seemed to move through the air like smoke. "Let's go," Sarah cried, her panic breaking the heavy silence. She bolted toward the doorway, her flashlight swinging wildly as she ran. The others didn't need convincing. One by one, they turned and followed her, their footsteps a frantic chorus against the debris-strewn floor. The house seemed to groan in protest as they fled, the shadows stretching and twisting unnaturally, chasing them with shapes that defied reason. Blake tripped over a loose brick, cursing as Anthony hauled him back to his feet. "Keep moving," Anthony barked, his own fear overwritten by the need to get everyone out. The clearing outside felt no safer. The air was thick, the moonlight dimmed by clouds that seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. The group huddled near the car, gasping for breath and scanning the tree line with shaking flashlights. "Everyone here?" Anthony asked, his voice low but firm. "Yeah," Megan said, clutching her arms. "But we're not sticking around to double-check." Blake fumbled with the keys, his hands trembling as he unlocked the doors. "Get in. Now." The car jolted as it hit the first of the deep potholes on the gravel road, the tires struggling for traction as Blake sped down the narrow path. The headlights barely pierced the darkness, illuminating only the jagged edges of the road ahead. "Slow down," Sarah yelled from the back seat, clutching the door handle as the car bounced violently. "If I slow down, whatever's back there will catch up," Blake shot back, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Anthony, sitting in the passenger seat, glanced at the rearview mirror. The darkness behind them seemed alive, shifting and writhing as if something unseen was following. "Just keep it steady," he said, his voice calm despite the pounding in his chest. The forest grew denser as they descended, the trees pressing closer to the road as though trying to trap them. A branch scraped against the side of the car, its sharp sound making Megan flinch. "Did you hear that?" Evan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "No one cares what you heard," Blake snapped. "We're getting out of here." When they reached the base of the hill, the group collectively exhaled, their panic giving way to a tense silence. The gravel road ended at the main highway, and just beyond it, the red and blue lights of a police cruiser flashed in the darkness. Blake cursed under his breath, slowing the car as the officer stepped into the road and waved them to a stop. "Great," Megan muttered. "Just what we need." Blake rolled down the window, forcing a shaky smile as the officer approached. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his face unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. "Evening," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You kids out for a late-night drive?" Yeah," Blake stammered. "Just heading home." The officer's eyes scanned the car, lingering on each of them for a moment before nodding. "Corpsewood, huh?" The group froze, their unease palpable. "You're not the first to come down from there tonight," the officer continued, his tone casual but laced with something darker. "Everyone accounted for?" "What do you mean?" Anthony asked, his voice steady despite the tension in the car. The officer tilted his head slightly, his gaze sharp. "Sometimes folks go up there and come back, and sometimes they don't. Just wanted to make sure you've got everyone you came with." Blake laughed nervously, gripping the wheel tighter. "We're all here." "Good," the officer said, stepping back. "You kids be careful. Night's not as quiet as it used to be." As he waved them on, the group sat in stunned silence for a moment before Blake hit the gas. The car sped onto the highway, the ruins of Corpsewood Manor finally shrinking behind them. No one spoke during the drive back to town. The earlier jokes and bravado had been replaced by a heavy silence, each of them lost in their own thoughts. The laughter that had followed them through the woods still echoed faintly in their ears, a reminder of what they'd left behind. When they finally reached the edge of town, Megan broke the silence. "We're never talking about this again." "Agreed," Sarah said quickly, her voice trembling. Anthony didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. The shadows seemed less threatening here, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed them. Blake pulled into a parking lot and turned off the engine, slumping back in his seat. "Next time we're going bowling." No one laughed, and so the shadows of Corpsewood Manor released their hold. For now, 5 friends may have escaped its clutches, but what of the others who tread too close? The ruins remain, watching, waiting, a silent predator in the heart of the forest. Perhaps you'll find yourself there one day, drawn by curiosity, or maybe by something else entirely. But remember, dear dreamers, some places are forgotten for a reason, and when the whispers begin and the laughter echoes, will you still believe it's all in your mind? Thank you for joining me tonight in the depths of the unknown. If you enjoyed this journey into the dark, be sure to subscribe and share the nightmare with others. Until next time, may your dreams be sweet or sinister. This is Mr. Sandman wishing you good night and good luck.